What's going on, y'all? Forward Fabian. I'm back again with a video and actually doing a reaction to This Is Why NASA Never Returned to the Moon. This is from Top Generality. So the description goes into the summer of 1969 was an eventful one. It was a season of good and bad. Sirhan was convicted of the murder in New York. All right, that's aside from Star Trek. Only a few moments in historic, memorable moments of the history, and that's, landing on the moon. I guess I'm not gonna give too much context away, but we've been back to the moon several times, right? So what are the title even talking about? Yeah, so I have an interesting stuff playlist where I react to content as such. So check that out. I'll link to the description as well as pin it in the comment section down below. If you have additional recommendations, go ahead and comment or put them in the comment section, man. Peace, love, prosperity, everybody out there rocking with the channel. What am I missing out? Subscribe, turn on notifications, engage with the content. That only helps me that much more on this platform as a content creator. I definitely appreciate everybody who's taking time out to watch these videos, man. So this is a 20-minute video. Let's go ahead and hop right in, though. Hop right in, though.
The summer of 1969 was an eventful one. It was a season of good and bad. Sirhan was convicted of murdering New York Senator Robert F. Kennedy. The last episode of Star Trek aired. The Beatles snatched the top song on Billboard's list. President Nixon pulled out 25,000 U.S. troops from Vietnam. The Manson murders happened, and a hurricane claimed the lives of more than 250 people. These are only a few of the most historic and memorable moments of that year. An unforgettable summer indeed. But the zenith of the summer of '69 was perhaps the Apollo 11 mission. On May 18th, the Apollo 10 mission was launched. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration commenced the mission in preparation for Apollo 11, another attempt by the United States to step on the moon. And on July 20th, 1969, Mission Commander Neil Armstrong and crewmate Buzz Aldrin became the first and second astronauts to step on the moon. With the success of the Apollo 11 mission, it was expected that NASA would once again launch another moon landing project. And yet, it never happened. Behind the historic event and all the glory are setbacks that could...
A lot of people say this whole thing was fake, staged, just for America to kind of assume dominance over other countries, to have accomplishing feats that other people weren't. I think the Russians were the actual people to first step on the moon. Correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of people don't even believe this really even happened, man.
Could have easily ended the mission prematurely or ended the mission disastrously. It turns out that there are several reasons why we haven't pursued going back to the moon. Let's dive into the little-known details of the famous moon landing and figure out the reasons why we haven't launched another moon mission. From the takeoff to the aftermath, here are 15 secrets about the Apollo 11 moon landing. Number 15. The Apollo 11 was an impressive feat itself. The Apollo 11 mission was the cultivation of hard work and hope of hundreds of thousands of people. Armstrong himself acknowledged that. To this day, the spacecraft that took part in the mission remained to be the greatest engineering feat in the history of mankind. In the 20th century, engineers started to plan and construct a ship that could break through our planet's atmosphere, reach the moon, and return back to our planet. They needed a ship that would keep the crew alive throughout a return trip to the moon. Engineers and experts started from scratch. It took more than 8 years and $2.4 billion for the Apollo 11 to be accomplished. In today's money, that amounts to a little over $23 billion. Before we go on, like this video, smash the subscribe button, and click the notification bell right now.
Okay.
Number 14. President Kennedy never cared.
Hold on, what they about to say?
Getting worse, it's not getting better.
But he did not care about the moon landings whatsoever. Bruh.
About the moon. When President John F. Kennedy kicked off the mission in 1960, cared right now. Number 14. President Kennedy never cared about the moon.
Dang.
When President John F. Kennedy kicked off the mission in 1961 and announced that the United States would go to the moon, he made an audacious statement. After all, no one in the early 1960s expected that NASA would be able to construct a magnificent spacecraft capable of taking on the impossible mission of sending men to the moon. And yet, thousands of workers spent their time and effort to make it happen. When Kennedy announced that he wanted the United States to be the very first to reach the moon, and that he wanted to make it happen before the end of the 1960s, NASA had nothing. It had no rockets, computers, spaceships, or even spacesuits. But they made it work, and they completed the mission right on time. But did you know that President Kennedy never cared about the moon? No, the ex-president's interest lay elsewhere. Kennedy wanted to beat the Soviets into reaching the moon first. More than 5 decades after the moon landing, secret documents revealed the real reason why Kennedy pushed NASA to do the unthinkable. At the time, the Soviet Union was taking the lead in space exploration. They were seen as the pioneers after sending cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin into space, and he became the first man to go to space. Kennedy didn't push for the project in the name of science or for something novel like gathering knowledge about the universe. According to the curator of the Smithsonian's Apollo collection, Teasel Muir-Harmony, Kennedy pushed for the project to demonstrate what the American industry was capable of doing. The higher-ups were motivated by political gains more than anything else at the time. But in the end, President Kennedy's ambition became one of the most impressive feats of mankind. Number 13. The Soviets tried to hide their attempt.
Kennedy was 43 at the age of coming into office. The youngest. I think it's the youngest at the time. They got Joe Biden, the oldest.
To go to the moon. In the 1960s, reaching the moon was a race between the Soviet Union and the United States. However, the Soviets denied their efforts to go to the moon until 1989. The United States announced its intention to go to the moon through Kennedy's speech, but the Soviet Union never made their goals public. Instead, the Soviets worked secretly on their own program and continued on even after Apollo 11 reached the moon on July 20th, 1969. Some people think that perhaps
the Soviets landed on the moon before we did. Am I mistaken to say that? So I guess not. They're saying Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, first 3 humans on the moon. The first human-made object to touch the moon was Soviet Union's Luna 2. So they didn't really send people. They had like little drones or whatever.
Perhaps the Soviets didn't want to admit that they were beaten by claiming that they never participated in the moon race to begin with. Now, have you ever wondered where all the conspiracy theories about the moon landing being faked came from? The space race was one of the reasons why some people think that the moon landing was faked. Conspiracy theorists started to convince people that the moon landing never happened and that NASA staged the entire thing to beat the Soviets. However, rest easy because all these claims were debunked. The moon landing is very much real. And if you ever get the chance to step foot on the moon, you would surely see traces of past moon missions up there. Number 12. No insurance company accepted the astronauts. Most of us have insurance. It's always good to prepare for the worst after all. Usually, it's not that hard to apply for, but Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins were quite different. You see, no insurance company would take you up as a client, especially if you're bound to be sent to the moon on a blasting spaceship. A lot commended their courage to embark on a space mission, but most of the insurance companies were sure they would suffer a huge loss if they made a deal with any of the astronauts. In short, they believed that they would not be returning from the mission. No one wanted to offer life insurance to the astronauts, so the 3 decided to be creative. The astronauts knew that there was a demand for their signatures. Online selling and auctions didn't exist back then, but they knew that regardless of their safety, their signatures would cost a lot of money. A month before Apollo 11 was set to be commenced, the 3 astronauts were quarantined, and they spent their time signing hundreds of covers. It was their own way of life insurance. Their postmarked autographs were supposed.
If you think about it, before this, they was like, obviously people didn't really realize or understand. I think they understood the magnitude of the mission, but like, I don't know if they really thought they was coming home. as sad as that sounds to say, but you know, on the way, these guys was rock stars. So much coverage for these three here. You know, everybody was giving them congratulations prior to the mission. You know, a lot of this is just power plays, just from a political standpoint. You know, because we was competing with the Soviet Union at that time to be doing a lot of new things, or to be the first. And like I said, just power play. You know, who's gonna be the first to do these type of things? It was kind of like setting trends at that point in time.
Supposed to be sold by their families should something happen to them in space. In the end, the Apollo 11 mission was a success. The three astronauts came home safely, and the autographs they left behind still gave enough funds to their family. Today, a single insurance autograph can cost as much as a whopping $30,000. Number 11. Spacesuits were created by a lingerie company. Everything used in the Apollo 11 mission is hailed as an engineering marvel.
Keep in mind,
so
the title
many
of the
people
video,
are
y'all.
often stumped
They're saying that's the reason why NASA never returned to the moon.
upon hearing that the spacesuits that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin wore during the moon landing were made by a lingerie company. Yes, you heard that right. Armstrong was wearing a custom-made spacesuit model A7L serial number 056 during the mission. At the time, it cost around $100,000, and in today's money, that would be more than $670,000. They didn't cut costs on the spacesuit. It was meant to protect the astronauts from the lunar temperature, which goes from a scorching 240 Fahrenheit in sunlight to a freezing minus 280 Fahrenheit in the shadows. This suit was also meant to shield them from solar.
I became a sperm donor with Cryos, and I made $780 each month. Is that?
I think it was a blessing that these folks landed on the moon, man. A huge blessing. Like when you think about, like, what was technology really like back then? The fact that this mission went smoothly. I don't know if it went smoothly, but that they sought it to the end. You know, they're able to start and finish it. It's just crazy, cause I don't know. You know, condolences. But I start thinking about what's it called? A Titanic submersible. Obviously, space, ocean, two different dynamics there, but in modern times, this type of technology still can't withstand. But back then, just like, it was the 60s, man. Like, and they're talking about suits were made out of lingerie. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, I don't know, God was really with that mission.
Ultraviolet radiation, which could be lethal to man. There was no room for error in the creation of the spacesuit, and even a small error in the stitching would cause it to be rejected. It was quite easy to make something that could withstand extreme temperatures and shield the astronauts from micrometeors, but the biggest challenge was making something that was flexible. The spacesuit makers were tasked to create a durable suit, but that could still give the astronauts flexibility and nimbleness. The astronauts needed to climb, bend, twist, and move their arms comfortably while on the moon. The International Latex Corporation in Dover, Delaware was the suit's creator, but the one that figured out how to solve the problem of flexibility was Playtex, a famous maker of bras and girdles in the 50s and 60s. Who knew that creators of female undergarments would solve the dilemma of a flexible spacesuit? Number 10.
Interesting.
Astronauts trained rigorously. The making of all the tech needed to reach the moon wasn't the only daunting part of the Apollo 11 mission. The astronauts tasked to step foot on the moon also underwent extreme preparation. Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins all underwent trips nationally and internationally to prepare their bodies for entering space. They trained in several sites, including Arizona, Texas, and Nevada. The astronauts trained and practiced collecting and analyzing rock and soil samples until it became muscle memory. They dug trenches, drove core tubes into the soil, and did other training to make sure they would be able to collect samples properly. However, the most challenging thing was to undergo the G-force training. They needed to maneuver themselves in zero gravity, and they needed to be able to do everything from moving from one place to another to planting a flag. Astronauts were suspended sideways, and they were tasked to walk along a wall to imitate the lower gravitational pull of the moon. Number 9. The Saturn V rocket almost exploded. Saturn V is a retired American super heavy-lift launch vehicle created by NASA. It was the one that launched Apollo 11 during its takeoff. However, NASA officials feared that it would blow up the spectators around the area because of an incident in 1968. At the time, Apollo 6 was launched as a test flight. and the massive rocket almost broke apart. In 1965, 2 engineers claimed that if an explosion ever occurred, it would create a massive fireball that was about 1,400 feet wide, with temperatures of up to 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. A lot of people gathered around the rocket in the Apollo 11 liftoff, but NASA still decided to take a few precautions. Most of the VIP guests were sealed 3.5 miles away from the pad during the liftoff, just in case something happened. Fortunately, Saturn V stayed strong, and none of the spectators around the perimeter were harmed. To this day, the mighty Saturn V is still the largest and most powerful rocket to complete its assigned mission without any deaths or problems. Number 8.
Okay.
Armstrong was too good of a pilot. After the liftoff, the success of the mission mostly relied on Neil Armstrong's capability. Before he was involved in the mission, Armstrong was a naval aviator, engineer, and test pilot. He was often commended for his piloting skills, and even Buzz Aldrin hails him as the best pilot he has ever known. However, did you know that Armstrong's perfectly piloting skills almost endangered him and his companion? NASA tried to pinpoint the exact landing location of the Eagle in the Sea of Tranquility, a section of the moon, but upon reaching the spot, there was a massive crater on the landing site. Armstrong decided to manually navigate until he found a suitable place to land, and he did so incredibly smoothly. In fact, it was so smooth that the Eagle landed too softly. The lander's legs were supposed to break off and crumple after absorbing the shock of the landing, but Armstrong was so good of a pilot that it didn't break. That's why instead of taking a step, the astronauts took a leap because the exit was higher than expected.
Huh? Nah. Is this real or are they just making this all up, bro? And my thing is, what's the variance between a space pilot and a actual airplane pilot, or a space shuttle pilot versus an airplane pilot? Because if Buzz Aldrin is proclaiming he's the greatest pilot of all time, now the moon landing was the first mission of its sort. So what was he really comparing that to? Like his piloting within a simulation, or like, that's what I'm trying to understand. That's crazy though. So Neil Armstrong, buddy, was that good. Wow. One giant leap for mankind.
The soft landing wasn't a problem, but the small miscalculation on where the Eagle would land cost them fuel. Fortunately, Armstrong knew they had enough fuel to land somewhere safely and make it back. Number 7. The moon had a smell.
Smell like cheese.
Have you ever wondered what the moon smells like? Well, according to Armstrong and Aldrin, it smelled like wet ashes and gunpowder. Upon reaching the moon, the two had a lot of uncertainties, and upon smelling lunar dust, they feared that it was flammable. They were ready to make preparations in case the lunar material caught on fire after making contact with oxygen. But fortunately, it didn't. However, the two astronauts claimed that the moon dust smelled so strongly, it was also irritating. So much so that the smell clung to the astronauts. Unfortunately, scientists on Earth never got the chance to smell lunar dust because the smell dissipated on its. Scientists on Earth never.
Look at that picture right there, man. A lot of people say, man, that's fake. And it's crazy due to tech and like how grainy the visual footage is. It does look kind of like something out of a film, you know. But how would we really know? I don't know, man. I think they did it. I think they made this move to the moon. I can't really knock it, but I mean, you had to be around during that time to justify it.
Never got the chance to smell lunar dust because the smell dissipated on its way to our planet. Number 6. Buzz Aldrin took communion on the moon. Now this is definitely one of the things that NASA most likely tried to keep under wraps. To this day, not a lot of people are aware of Aldrin's hushed-up communion on the moon. There was no other reason besides the fact that the Christian ceremony might garner unwanted attention and scrutiny from the public.
Haters.
Buzz Aldrin wasn't the first person to ever pray in space, but he was the very first, and most likely last, to take part in the first Christian sacrament.
Come back and get credit for the work you've put in at Purdue Global.
But he was a real
With your
believer.
Experience and
sacrament on the moon. He did the unthinkable. He took sacred bread and wine blessed on Earth and performed the Holy Communion on the moon. Aldrin did it while preparing to walk out of the spacecraft and be the second person to walk on the moon. As Aldrin requested for a few moments of silence and for the listeners on ground control to give thanks in their own way, Armstrong watched quietly and did not participate. NASA kept the entire thing mostly a secret in fear that it would cause the same incident as what happened on the Apollo 8 mission, when NASA was sued after astronauts read a passage from the book of Genesis. In time, it seems like many began to respect Aldrin's decision. At the end of the day, we're all living on the same Earth.
That goes to show, pretty much, I don't really like to use the word religion, but spiritual belief is a no-go in terms of anything, it don't really make no sense. I was going to say political aspects or mainstream driven, but it's just crazy how much like the world tries to shut out any belief system. They rather have, peace, or what they would call peace in some shape, form, or fashion kept versus you talking about spiritual belief, because I think people just believe that causes way more chaos or confrontation. How are you going to get sued for saying a prayer or reading a passage, a scripture from the word?
At the same moon and blessed by the same sun. No matter what you believe in, it doesn't change the fact that we're all humans. Number 5. The iconic line of Armstrong might have been a misquote. As a part of a historic event, the first thing that Neil Armstrong uttered on top of lunar soil became one of the most iconic lines in history. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Armstrong claimed as he made the first step on the moon. At least, that was what watchers on Earth heard. According to Armstrong, he said something a bit different. Instead of the famous quote, he said, "That's one small step for a man." It's a tiny misquote, and it's not that big of a deal. But it's true that there is a misquote. It's just that the footage people saw didn't clearly pick up the exact words that Armstrong said on the moon. It doesn't really matter what he said, but Armstrong wanted to make sure that he got his grammar right by including the indefinite article. However, the audio recording proved otherwise. After a while, even Armstrong himself started to doubt what he actually said. Fortunately, in 2006, a computer programmer named Peter Shanford analyzed the recording. He found out that there was a brief and unintelligible sound between the words "for" and "man." So I guess in the end, Neil Armstrong said the statement correctly. And now it's time for today's topic. This is why NASA never returned to the moon. Years after the Apollo 11 mission, UFOologists and conspiracy theorists on the internet
It's a mummified space lady. What is they doing with this, bro?
claimed that NASA took more from the moon than just lunar dust and space rocks. They claim that the administration also recovered the remains of an alien, which they continue to hide to this day. More than 5 decades after the moon landing, we still haven't found life on our satellite. But many believe that the higher-ups know something that we don't. Do you believe that there really is life on the moon? Or is this nothing but another hoax? As always, comment down below with the hashtag today's topic, and let us know your opinion about what we just showed on screen. With that said, let's keep things moving. Number 4. Neil and Buzz were almost stranded on the moon. To this day, not a lot of people are aware that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were almost stranded on the moon. After the historic moonwalk on July 20th, 1969, the 2 astronauts were preparing to return to command from their lunar module when they suddenly noticed a small switch on the ground. It came from the broken tip of a circuit breaker. The switch accidentally broke while Buzz and Neil were putting on their life support system backpack. And that small mishap could have left them stranded on the moon with no way to go back to Earth. After all, the small circuit breaker switch was needed for takeoff. The 2 astronauts immediately alerted ground control about it, but they remained calm. The solution to their problem was quite unexpected. As an engineer, Buzz figured out an unlikely way to make the broken circuit breaker work. A felt-tip pen. Buzz pressed the circuit breaker in, closed it, and made it work. They delivered the good news to ground control, and everything went smoothly. The ascent engine worked, and they were blasted off the moon. But the challenges of a safe touchdown on Earth...
See what I'm saying? Like things that just went faulty. Buddy had to use a pen to fix the circuit breaker or whatever they said. It's just like, it's a blessing, you know what I mean? Like, use quick thinking, MacGyver type of thinking. In that moment, you just finesse it. and then things end up working towards your favor. You know, I think it was a great thing. He did the communion, you know, up there. God was definitely in spirit. You know, God was there. But this mission, just everything about it, because we see so many issues with like a lot of these spaceships and takeoffs and, you know, spaceships blowing up, that this is just beyond fathomable, you know, especially for its time. And for there not to be any other man-made missions.
Didn't end there. After a long flight of 195 hours, 18 minutes, and 35 seconds, Apollo 11 touched down in the Pacific Ocean. Its landing was supposed to be documented by the recovery ship USS Hornet, but bad weather made the Apollo 11 land 13 miles further than the ship.
I'm tripping.
So
this says 6 missions landed humans on the moon, beginning with Apollo 11 in 1969. Apollo 13 was intended to land, however, it was restricted to a flyby due to malfunction aboard the spacecraft. Okay, that's not a land, bro. How many people landed on the moon? Nobody else landed. All these are talking about failed to orbit, failed to land, entered orbit, to orbit the moon. I don't know. It's like they're beating around the bush, man. Six crewed U.S. landings between 69 and 72. Say 12 human beings have been able to walk the moon in total.
Change could have ended in a disaster, but fortunately, Buzz and Neil,
So Apollo 11, Apollo 15, Apollo 16, and Apollo 17
came out safe. Number 3. The astronauts were quarantined after reaching home. The hardest parts were over, but the astronauts couldn't rest just yet. Before they could go back home and reunite with their families, they had to be quarantined. Although many believe it's quite impossible that there's life on the moon, NASA still wanted to be safe. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins were all quarantined for 21 days after their historic mission to the moon. NASA claimed that this was a necessary action in case the three were exposed to lunar bacteria or other harmful unknown elements. Neil even celebrated his birthday in quarantine. NASA made sure to prepare though. Even though he was under restriction, Armstrong celebrated his birthday with festivities. He had a surprise birthday party with a cake made by the Lunar Receiving Laboratory at what is now Johnson Space Center. Meanwhile, doctors kept a close eye on the astronauts, and experts analyzed all the lunar material they recovered from the Apollo 11 mission. After 21 long days, the astronauts were finally cleared and were given the go signal to return home. Luckily, it seemed like no pathogen or lunar bacteria decided to hitchhike with the astronauts on their way back to Earth. I don't think we could handle an outbreak of moon sickness just yet. Number 2. Our traces on the moon. It seems like all of us have the inherent desire to mark places that we've reached before. Travelers often leave behind marks or signs in places they go, while some opt to collect souvenirs to remember the place they visited. Likewise, astronauts also leave something behind in all the places they go to in space. Many think that the only thing Apollo 11 left behind on the moon was
If I lost it all and I had to start from scratch, here's what I'd do to get back to 6 figures a year in 4 steps. So step 1, I'd go on Amazon and search for book topics.
Was the flag of the United States. However, the mission left more human traces on the moon. For one, the footprints left behind by Armstrong and Aldrin are still on the moon. There's no weather on the satellite after all, and there's a chance that the footprints could last almost as long as the moon itself. Part of the landing module stage was also left behind. One of its legs contained a plaque that read, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot on the moon July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind." I guess it was important to clarify that we came in peace, just in case extraterrestrial creatures stumble upon it. There are also all sorts of tools and trash left behind on the moon. The astronauts of the Apollo 11 mission had no choice but to discard all of their insignificant belongings to lessen the weight carried by the spacecraft. They left behind the hammers, scoops, and human waste. 96 bags of it. So yes, one of the things we left behind on the moon was human excrement. Number 1. Everyone expected a disaster. In the 1960s, iPads, tablets, AIs, and all other technology that we have access to today didn't exist. That's why many expected the mission to fail. After all, reaching the moon was such an incredible feat that it almost sounded impossible. Activists opposed the funding of the mission, claiming that it was unrealistic and that the money could be used elsewhere. Some people didn't express their negative thoughts so openly, but they believed that the mission would be a disaster. However, the general public wasn't the only one who had doubts about the mission's success. Even President Richard Nixon himself was ready should the Apollo 11 mission fail. Before the mission reached its conclusion, presidential speechwriter William Safire prepared a speech for President Nixon. It was a statement that should have been said if the mission ended in a catastrophe. It involved discussing the risks of space travel and perhaps acknowledging Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. Many waited for Apollo 11's takeoff from the moon with bated breath. Many believed that the mission was a one-way ticket and that the astronauts wouldn't be able to return back. Fortunately, this space failure speech will forever remain undelivered. It might take a while before we embark on another iconic space mission, but day by day we continue to learn more about the universe we live in, thanks to astronauts and the space probes that roam in space. Besides, we are but a speck of dust in the galaxy, and it's far too ambitious for us to know everything there is to know about the universe. For now, we'll take our time and unravel the mysteries one step at a time.
Buzz Aldrin, man. Let me know y'all's thoughts on this one in the comment section below. Of course, people thought this mission was going to fail, man. Nobody had no hope. Crazy, though. Hey, comment down below. I'm not huge into, outer space moon missions, but interesting content, interesting subject matter. So like, comment, subscribe, man. Check out the interesting stuff, playlist. I'll link to that in the description as well as put it in the comment section down below, man. Peace, love, prosperity, everybody rocking with the channel. Comment down videos you want to see, and we'll catch you guys in the next time.